Well, Murray, here we are sitting in the park in sunny Scotland, unusual, just talking about Project Sunce.
Indeed. Well, thanks. It's glad to be here. This is actually a place where I grew up, in this particular town. It's not an area where a lot of our projects were based, but it's still a place where there's a lot of social enterprises all over Scotland, as you're well aware.
Yep. And why are there so many social enterprises in Scotland compared proportionately to other places?
I think partly to do with the infrastructure. We have a remote rural element in Scotland which is quite significant, particularly from the Highlands and Islands, which is one of the reasons why Highlands and Islands led on this European project. The remote rural factor is quite significant because public sector isn't able, for economic and practical reasons, isn't able to reach some of the more remote, isolated areas, and the communities have to, by default as well as design, deliver things for themselves. So it's very common in Scotland to find, particularly in remote, isolated rural communities delivering services that you might consider would be delivered by the health service or by public service, by public sector, local authorities and so on. So I think that's one of the major parts of this, and obviously you have quite an innovative population.
Talking to Alex yesterday in Edinburgh, he was saying the population of Scotland's 5 million, but the size of Scotland in terms of length is almost the same as England, and people often forget that. And this is a huge country with a tiny population, and in fact of that tiny population most of them live in 2 cities. So people are spread so wide and so far, the normal market mechanisms just don't work, do they, here?
No, that's right. And again, that's where you have the most common areas of market failure. And so what might be successfully operated by public sector or private sector might well be not cost efficient for any organisation to want to run a particular service, sell a product to a particular geography, and therefore that's where you have the need for community-led organisations and social enterprises and social entrepreneurs to develop and deliver services.
And Scotland has the government of Scotland have been supporting this agenda now. I was surprised, for over 20 years. This is not something that's new. This is something they knew they had to do a long time ago.
It has. The Scottish Government has been very, very supportive of social enterprise and community-led development for a long time. HI itself, my own organisation, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, has got experience of over 50 years in supporting community-led organisations.
Wow. Yeah, you forget that. So talking then about Sunce, which was the supporting networks for social enterprises, the project that was born before COVID and really developed during COVID, so things had to change. What was the fundamental objective for yourselves in being involved in Project Sunce? Well,
it was quite an easy opportunity for us to want to lead on this particular project, act as lead partner, but we weren't the only one. HI and the other partners in Suncea, the other 8 member countries that are involved in the project, they have recognised for some time the enormous value that community-owned businesses, social enterprises, the value to the economy and the value to local communities created by social enterprises. And we felt it important to set out to create and develop an infrastructure which would encourage social entrepreneurs, it would encourage new social entrepreneurs and support the existing ones, and to establish and improve the infrastructure or the ecosystem, if you like, for supporting these organisations. And lastly, to look at this in an international way. We felt it important to have a transnational exchange of that one, because there's best practice not just in Scotland but in parts all over the European countries, and particularly this project was funded by Northwestern Europe, NWE Interreg. The countries that have been involved have similar remote, rural, isolated areas where, and they all had the pockets of really good practice. So the important thing was that we could share and exchange best practice and share these experiences.
Yeah, the N in Sunce stands for network, And in a way, Scotland had got a pretty well developed infrastructure before, and indeed some of the other partners had as well. But what we didn't have is this connectivity between each other. So I think SUNS has perhaps helped us to share that good practice and to work together to create something better.
It has done that, and then the successful part of this as well, not just during the project. The funded part of the project is now complete. As you're aware, the European official funded project ended in June last year, June 2022. However, we're continuing to support the project for at least another further 3 years, which is an excellent legacy, so that we can continue to support and network organisations in the future.
And I've been involved in European projects for 20 years. And one of my frustrations of pretty well every project is you do really good work on the projects, and when the money and the projects end, sometimes the projects end as well. And this is absolutely the first project I've ever worked on where within the project we've decided that we want to continue it self-funded beyond the project, which to me actually is a huge value added.
It was a natural progression. I know exactly what you mean. It's very common for European projects to only operate when the match funding is in place from Europe. The fantastic success is a great legacy for this particular project that showed how useful it has been and how useful the partners feel that it's going to be to continue this one. It's not had a particular large resource input to continue it for the further 3 years, thanks in part to the change of focus from a physical space for the network to become the online element, the virtual space that was created, which was born out of the hardship that we faced with the challenge of COVID, but actually turned out to be very, very beneficial to the project. It forced the partners to consider how more beneficial it would be to operate things remotely.
Yeah, so my next question was going to be about, have you had, I say this somewhat tongue-in-cheek really, but have you had any particular challenges of this project that emerged during the project? And of course you've just alluded to COVID. SUNS, when it started, was a hub-based physical project. Suddenly, a year and a half in, we weren't allowed to meet. We had to do something. So that basically gave the choice of you end the project or you think quick and do something different. And we luckily chose to do the latter.
Absolutely. But like the majority of European projects at the time, it stalled. It stalled because everything stalled. It was lockdown. You couldn't meet even if you wanted to. It wasn't that people weren't travelling. There was complete lockdown in most of the countries. Nobody could travel to any events. It didn't take the partners very long, I found, to recognise that this could probably be done just as effectively. And we say just as effectively, it turns out to be more effective, but just as effectively at the time. It could be done remotely. We can access more individuals. It overcame so many barriers. It was more sustainable, it was more efficient, there was no travel barriers. Even in Scotland, for example, we had planned to have 4 physical hubs based across the Highlands and Islands, but even then there is still a very long travelling distance between some of these areas for certain individuals to be able to get to support, to get face-to-face one-to-one support in the old traditional method. So this has removed the barriers immediately. As soon as it came at the same time as Zoom was developed, and we had Microsoft Teams being used at the time, and the internet, the advent of these meeting software systems, all came at exactly the right time. That a lot of the training could be shifted really quickly, not just one-to-one training, but one-to-many training and support, so that it allowed networking, it allowed exchange of ideas, it allowed trainers and advisors and mentors to be able to hold meetings with individuals from not just all over remote areas of Scotland, but all over Europe, which brought everybody together very quickly. So that was one challenge that was overcome really, really quickly. There were other challenges that we had at the beginning, as you'll be aware. I think at the beginning there was certain discussion over common definitions of what is a social entrepreneur, what's a community enterprise, what is a social business, and I think over time we became to realise that these definitions probably aren't as important as actually what the organisations do And one thing that is common to all of these businesses, whether they're private sector, whether they're led by social entrepreneurs, whether partly run for profit, partly done for social business purposes, or whether they're fully community-led social organisation that's recognised charity, the one common aim that they all had is that they all have a very strong social purpose at the very core of what they do. And that became the target for the type of organisations that we wanted to support.
I mean, it's interesting times. I mean, just as an aside on tape, Murray took over as the project lead about a year in, and I think just pretty well at the moment you took over, COVID started. So I think it's fair to say I'm the only person that you've met face to face.
That is correct. Yeah.
So we've had to deliver a project in a way we could never ever have imagined, but we've done it successfully.
Absolutely, and it was relatively easy to do.
Incredible.
Once, I think there was a reluctance to use technology at the beginning from all of the partners, and then when you get used to that, and then the clients know where to go, the clients can dial in, and one of the key parts of the project, as well as delivering and setting up an infrastructure for support, one part of that was the development of the support mechanisms themselves, the training, the packages that were going to be developed again and delivered physically, and they were to a certain extent delivered physically, but the creation of the online virtual hub through the Sunsea website enabled this all to be kept in the one place, to be accessible to anybody who wants to be. Excuse me, there's a train passing by.
The short one.
It kind of just all came together very neatly at the right time.
I mean, I think that, I've been involved in trying to get digital learning going for 25 years, and it's been pushing water uphill. Literally in a year, I think we did things that it's taken me 25 years not to do.
It is, and you wouldn't wish it again, but COVID did have that one advantage, that forced the partners into delivering something which actually turned out to be a very sensible way to do it, a far more efficient, far more sensible.
The hazards of doing things live.
There is
trains and motorbikes. So
Indeed.
you mentioned there about the successes of Suns. What did the project achieve in the end?
So the obvious ones, we were setting out at the beginning to get an increased understanding from the public sector as to how to support, the best way to support social entrepreneurs going forward. We set out to create hubs in each of the participating countries. So we set out to create eight local delivering hubs. Now, all of them were delivered initially physically, but they then quickly moved on to being delivered remotely, and majority of them just remained purely delivering remotely with the same resources, but being able to access more people. So you had these 8 hubs, and of course coming together, you were able to join all of this support together to create the transnational hub. So they were the obvious things. That's what the project was to originally set out to do. But some of the project outputs we've absolutely exceeded by way more than our imaginations would have ever believed. So, for example, during the project we had a target of approaching or being able to support approximately 300 people during the course of the project across the countries. We actually approached well over 700 people. 700 people. That was not just came into contact with 700 people, that was receiving reasonably regular support from the organisation. So that was in part down to the fact that it was delivered remotely. So we were able to exceed that. We worked with around 200 new and existing businesses during that time. We enabled around 150 organisations to create social enterprise products and services, or social products and services that were new to the organisation. And importantly, and this is a byproduct of all of this, we managed to create 66, across the whole of the partnership areas, we created 66 brand new social enterprises that were not running at all before them. And that's not a traditional output for Interreg projects, that's a byproduct of the support that we offered.
Yeah, I mean, that is phenomenal. And what's even more phenomenal is we can continue to support those 66 businesses that started, and we can work with new ones as well because they can get the support online still.
Well, indeed, it's ongoing, and the numbers are higher now. We know this. It takes a long time for some individuals to be able to get the the resources together, to find the access, to begin to develop and find the right place in their lives to be able to create the job, to create the social enterprise that they want to do. And therefore we know, and we've had anecdotal evidence, I hear it from the providers that we were working with, we hear it from partners, that since the official bit of the project ended, more of the organisations that we supported have now started up and they've set up. I'm only referring to the duration of the project, the numbers that we've got just now.
I mean, one of the things that interests me about these businesses is that we've suddenly realised through COVID that the market mechanisms that we'd really long thought were the way to do things suddenly didn't work, and we've all suddenly realised that we do need a plan B for some other mechanisms to deliver services, be it help old people. When the normal system doesn't work, we suddenly had to go down this road, and actually we had to value it differently to that which we perhaps did before. And that might well be good for new social enterprises in the future, people realising that we do need these companies run properly. I always say with social enterprises, the word not-for-profit is not a good term. It's profit for purpose. We need them to be sustainable, to be profitable, and to recycle those profits then back into future developments that further the cause they're supporting. And we're seeing more people want to do that, aren't we?
Oh, very much so. And this is the way I think that the support infrastructure is changing to recognise this as well. You've got a couple of things. You've got more and more social entrepreneurs realising that they have a lot to offer. There may be individuals that have moved to an area, and particularly from my own area, we have a lot of individuals moving into an area, they retire or they're in their later years of employment, and they feel that they're new to an area, they'd like to be able to put something back, they want to get involved in the local community, and they want to solve some problems and local challenges, and that's fantastic. So there's a will to change and to change the world, for want of a better phrase, one piece at a time. But the public sector, through encouragement from partners in Sunsea and other partners, are beginning to recognise the real value that these individuals have to local economies and local communities, and are trying to find ways to support them and encourage them to deliver support. We're trying to help, for example, in High, we recognise that the important thing is we want to help the communities to be able to help themselves and to be able to develop their own economies.
I mean, when you look at developed countries' economies, most of our efforts over the last 100 years have been developing younger people to become part of the workforce, to do the things that the workforce needs. And suddenly we find ourselves with rapidly ageing populations, and we suddenly begin to realise that old people stay healthier longer. Being old is not a proxy for being useless, and we've got to start to learn to capture the experience, wisdom, skills, aptitude of those older people to drive these new community economies forward. And I think that's something else that's become very clear to me during this project.
Very much, and we're doing it now. The partners are recognising this. Highlands and Islands Enterprise, my own organisation, we recognise that from experience. We know that there's the ageing population that we have, they're not down and out. They can offer so much. But the flip side of that is we also want to encourage young people to become involved in community enterprise and community-led organisations. Harder to get some of the younger people involved. We are now beginning able to do that effectively. I'll wait a little bit till one of the many trains that's passed. I was joking that there's very few trains go along this. There I have it. That was incorrect. So we're now spending time to encourage and support young people, because there's a huge amount of innovation to be had from getting involved in supporting young people. But the young people can offer so much innovation by becoming involved in community-based organisations that haven't traditionally had young people involved in them.
I mean, I've always thought that there's a real natural dynamic between grandparents and grandchildren. And I think the same can be said in some of these things. These older people working with younger people create this dynamic that really is powerful. And I think that too is going to be something we need to look long and hard at, because we need, many of these older people have got tacit knowledge embedded in their minds that they need to pass down to the younger generations. And the best way to do that, I think, is through projects and commonality of goal So I think we might see some of that in the future.
That's right. Well, I think you might call it community, and that's exactly what
Precisely.
when they work well, they really do. And community-led organisations and communities that begin to develop or have developed for some years, community-based responses to community challenges, community problems, they come together, they mix really well, and it's a great example of that. And the fact that they create training opportunities for young people, job opportunities for young people who by and large may be otherwise forced to move to the major cities to try and find employment. So the fact that community-led organisations are operating in the most remote rural communities across Northwest Europe, there's still opportunities for employment and training for these young people. It's busy today.
I think that's the express to Glasgow. BBC don't have these problems.
Never do.
Where do you think we're going to be in 10 years' time with social enterprise?
I think there's a few things I think they're improving all the time. The numbers that we see in our regular census, Scotland, supported by the Scottish Government and the public sector, run a social enterprise census, usually every couple of years. And the last one was 2021, so we're due one this year. The numbers are increasing year on year.
Wow.
And significantly so. You know, the number of community enterprises or social enterprises or organisations with a social purpose that define themselves as so is growing quite exponentially. I think over the next 10 years you're going to get a greater number of organisations delivering services that the public sectors had to retract from, sort of withdraw from,
Sure.
because of reduced budgets and so forth. But you know, that's no bad thing. It gives you community-led responses to local solutions to local challenges, local problems. Communities operating as communities again. But I think there's more ways that we're moving towards as well. That we are also working on some projects now to develop a toolkit to help organisations to be able to measure not just their statistics and their output, but the social impact of what they're doing. And I think to be able to tell their story better, so we're developing some products and tools for social enterprises in Scotland. They will be globally available because we'll make these available on the World Wide Web. For any organisation that has a social purpose, they'll be able to use this toolkit that they can measure not just the nuts and bolts of what they do. Normally they have to respond to funders that deliver X, Y and Z, whereas the real core, the real purpose that these organisations have set up to do, they find it often difficult to prove their worth, to tell their story, to say this is the impact we're actually making in our community.
That gives me a segue in. I mean, if you could give policy developers and indeed social entrepreneurs that could be social entrepreneurs in the future, what advice would you give to them?
I think being able to know the infrastructure, it should become easier, but to be able to understand the ecosystem for support, there's a lot of support out there. It's not always the easiest thing to find, but mainstream organisations such as Business Link, Business Gateway or other business support organisations that tend by and large to be publicly funded or regional government funded, they are far more conversant now with the needs of social enterprises. By and large, the needs are not that dissimilar to a private sector for-profit enterprise. And there's now a good recognition that the support that is available is flexible enough to be able to support those organisations. We've also got the Sunsea website, which has dedicated range of support tailored exactly to allow a potential social entrepreneur to be able to identify whether their business is viable, whether it's going to be a useful business, whether it's for them, whether they should invest time, resources and maybe their own money involved in this one. So that's one side of things. The infrastructure should be fairly easy to be able to tap into. But the other thing, and I think it brings us back to what Sunsea was about, is the best thing I would say is network.
Yeah.
Learn from best practice, learn from examples. The best people to tell you about social enterprises are the people that are running them, and as we know, the number is increasing year on year.
I mean, I think a reflection of success in the end will be when we don't talk about digital versus face-to-face, we just talk about learning and we just do it whatever way we want to do it at the time.
Yeah.
And where age doesn't matter, you know, they might be young, they may be old, they're involved in trying to solve a problem, and you know, the way they do it, you know, that they will work out the best way. There's a whole load of things that I think that by biting away at the elephant here, we will gradually come to these solutions that are probably fit for the world that we now live in, as opposed to fit for the world that we're probably leaving behind us.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
You know,
And it's just recognising that shift. I think the public sector, partly part of one of the outputs of Sunseed was to really speak to the public sector and the regional support organisations to be able to get that policy shift. And I think that's happening now. I think we're beginning to see that. It's not easy, it doesn't happen overnight, but that recognition of the value of social enterprise and of supporting social entrepreneurs is now beginning to take root.
I think you said something a minute ago that really resonated with me, and that is for us to influence credibly policymakers, we need better to measure impact. And I think now, having got these sort of projects started, by longitudinally revisiting how these businesses, the 66 new ones, are going, if we can demonstrate how a number of those grow and the changes they make in the areas they work in, that's what policymakers need, because they need stories, they need information themselves, and we will be able to give them that.
Absolutely. And again, it's back to the point I made at the same time, which was it's more than simply just the increase in turnover or the number of jobs that they may have created. It's about how they've impacted on their community, how it has affected that local community, what problems they've solved, how people are now moving back into the area, how people feel more confident about employment or training or access to jobs or information or whatever it might be. This is the key that social enterprises are being able to deliver now.
And some things you can't numerically quantify on a spreadsheet, and I think that that's something else we've got to make sure that the qualitative impacts are as important as the quantitative ones. And I think we've gone through a period where everyone wanted things measuring, and some things are not easy to measure, but you know they've made a difference. And I suspect that some of these little case studies that we're going to be building over the next year or two will absolutely show that.
I'd like to think so, and I look forward to working with you on them. Yeah.
That's good. Thank you, Murray. That's great.
You're welcome.